Albuquerque elected a new mayor this week. Soon after polls closed at 7 on Tuesday, political insiders were already calling it a victory for Tim Keller. His opponent, Dan Lewis, conceded the election shortly before 8 o'clock, and Mr. Keller made a victory speech to a gathering of his supporters a little after that. Unofficial election results show Mr. Keller taking 62% of the vote, Mr. Lewis 38%. Also that night, Democrat Cynthia Borrego defeated Republican Robert Aragon in a runoff election for a seat on the City Council in District 5. Now, there's a lot to talk about here with this week's Aligned Opinion panelists. I'm joined this week by former state senator Diane Snyder. She's here with us. Laura Sanchez-Rivey, she's an attorney at Cuddy & McCarthy LLP. Harry Van Buren, professor in UNM's Anderson School of Management, and former House Minority Whip Daniel Double Fist Pump Foley. Welcome. Diane, let me start with you. In Mr. Keller's speech, he talked a lot about inclusion, beating back negativity, rejection of negative campaigning and division. That's all well and good after it's all done, but now he has to move forward and govern, and this is going to be an interesting time. But let's stay back here a little bit. What do you attribute this kind of a mandate 62% win to? What worked well for Tim Keller this cycle?
I think what worked well for Tim Keller is that he was a Democrat, not a Republican.
Gotcha.
I think that the community is concerned about our governor, which happens with every governor when you get into the eighth year, seventh and eighth year. Yep. Same thing, concern about the president and things that are happening. There's still a great deal of anger about losing, from Democrats about Mrs. Clinton losing. That's and right. I think that did more for him than anything else. I think he made a lot of promises, and he kept preaching about how clean he was. Right. And yet, the day before the election is the ethics committee said, no, he was guilty. But the worst part about that was, oh yeah, he was guilty of wrongdoing.
He just didn't mean it.
But he just didn't mean, he didn't mean to.
And hence no fine.
So we're not, fine. Yeah. I mean, a minimum of a reprimand.
Right.
So that there was some true significance of not doing it.
That's right.
And so that makes me worried about, well, is it going to be too easy to say, oh, well, I didn't mean to do that?
Gotcha.
Or, so I wish him the very best.
Sure.
I think Tim's a nice guy.
We're gonna wrestle this financing thing you're dancing on the edge of. We're gonna wrestle this to the ground here at this table as well, too. HVB, good to see you. Welcome back from your overseas trip. And now, interestingly, we have a new mayor. Since you were away, we came back to a new mayor.
Things
right,
how that
exactly.
Works.
Don't turn your back around Albuquerque. In your opinion, what worked for Mr. Keller and what did not work for Mr. Lewis? Was it as simple as, Democrats enjoy a registration advantage, all that kind of thing? Or was there something else in the air?
Well, I think Diane points out that the trend was better for Democrats than it was for Republicans. But I think there were a couple of other things going on. I think Tim Keller got a lot of really good institutional support from the police union, the fire union, and a bunch of other institutions that really make an enormous difference. Right. We'll talk a little bit about some of the financing issues and the in-kind sorts of things later on. But I just never saw a theory of the race in which Dan Lewis was going to win, because it just always struck me that his floor and his ceiling were pretty much the same.
Gotcha.
It was going to be very, very difficult when you're endorsed, say, by a prominent local pastor who says, I'm endorsing you because you won't support the gay agenda. I've never understood where the gay agenda is, or I can find a copy. But leaving that aside just for a moment, I think that made it really difficult for Dan Lewis to broaden the base and to get the support he needed to overcome all the institutional advantages that Tim Keller had.
That's a good point there. And Laura, it's pretty clear that Mr. Lewis needed to pinch a bunch of independents, a bunch of Democrats, and that was going to be a tough throw. I mean, it just didn't happen for him. Was it more than just something in the air right now? I'm still sort of trying to figure this out. Was there something very particular to Mr. Keller's message that really rang?
Well, I think we have to go back to the election that occurred in October. Going into that, he had a very strong ground game. He really did a lot in terms of neighborhood, block by block, I think was the
tremendous amount of volunteers. That's right.
He had a huge ground game.
Yep.
And that helped him peel off a lot of support from the other. I mean, we had a lot of people running. Right. And so, he didn't get to that 50% threshold to be able to not have to have a runoff, but he certainly had a wide margin. And I think that in a low turnout election, which is what happens with municipal elections, that sort of ground game, making sure your people come out to vote, makes a huge difference. And I think he definitely focused on that a lot. Despite, he had this issue with that Diane brings up about the campaign financing. Even in that part of the election, and that was, in the news and everything. But I think the local message, the real sort of retail politics at the doorstep, made a big difference for him, and people continued to support him once he went into the runoff.
Right. Plus, we had an interesting ballot initiative, back then that he sort of rode a little bit. You know what I mean? There's a lot of door-to-door knocking with those folks. It sort of worked out well for him. Dan, I want to concentrate on Mr. Lewis for a quick minute with you on this. He had an opponent in Wayne Johnson, and it might be considered that Mr. Johnson may have split off some more of the harder edge right vote. Am I on the right track on that? That never came back to Mr. Lewis during this runoff? What happened there?
It's clear Republicans have a long history of divide and conquer,
right.
And we divide and conquer ourselves, right? I mean, we have a primary, 2 Republicans run,
right.
The winner usually never gets the losers people to come aboard. Democrats do a far better job of beating the absolute holy bejeebers out of each other, and then coalescing in the general election and saying we got a solid focus to go win. We just haven't done that. I think right now that the Republican Party in New Mexico is in a little bit of disarray.
Okay.
I think that there's I think that you look at what's going on. There's a disconnect, it seems like, between the party and the governor. There's a disconnect between people that are talking about running for governor. Congressman Pierce and his group which seem to be aligned with the Republican Party, are not friends of the governor and the outgoing administration. Dan Lewis kind of got caught in the middle of that, I think. But I also think, regardless of any of that, it was a huge uphill battle for any Republican after 8 years of R.J. Berry not delivering, promising certain things, really turning his back on a lot of issues that I think he could have been a leader on, that I think, I heard from a lot of friends of mine that live in Albuquerque, we gave the Republicans, even Republicans, we had it for 8 years and we really didn't do that much with it. So they didn't go vote for Tim Keller. They were just like, I just don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, I think that was a huge hill. Now I do think, it's going to be amazing to see Tim Keller with his new general counsel that's going to run the city, the head attorney, Laura.
Wow.
I'm announcing that today, that she's going to take that job if she's offered.
Oh, Dan, you're hysterical.
But I think at the end of the day, I do think it's going to be interesting to see how Tim now, regardless of what people say about city politics and the divide that's growing with Republicans and Democrats, the divide with Republicans and Democrats has always been that what's growing is the number of independents that are registering.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
You look at the support that now Mayor-elect Keller received. Very heavy left, very heavy progressive, very heavy liberal, far left. How does he come back and keep those folks happy and attract the center-right, moderate folks that want to be part of it? And so it's going to be interesting. Is he going to turn around and take things that that failed on the ballot, like the sick leave, which he's made no bones about? He's going to try to implement. So you have the voters that said, even though it was by a very close margin, we don't like this. Now you got a mayor that says, I'm going to implement it. It's going to be tough to deliver, I think.
Let's talk about money, but real quick, I'm going to go around the table and stay with you real quick.
Sure.
It seemed like Mr. Keller proved an interesting point with public finance until you factor in all the other money that came in through his PACs and other things. Where does this leave public finance?
I think it proves my point that I've said all along with public finance. It doesn't work.
Okay.
And what we have is someone who, what I do find, being the broken record on is that, I'm tired of politicians that say I stand for something and do the exact opposite thing. When you say you're the clean guy and you're all for public financing, then win or lose with public financing. Don't decide halfway through the race that it's not working for me and how can you obfuscate the rules and make a difference.
Laura,
that's what he did.
Not many people would disagree with that, I wouldn't think. That's a fair assessment. That if you're going to go down that route and say you're going to do this because you want to be clean and out of influence of money, you know what I mean? Something didn't quite match there.
Well, and I also think, in all fairness, it's important to recognize sort of what was happening in that context. I think there was his message and his commitment to run under public financing, and there was also some serious missteps by his campaign. And that clearly came out during a lot of that investigation, the KOB reporting. There were things that the campaign management, the consulting firm was doing in terms of getting those kinds of so-called in-kind donations from people that it wasn't clear, at least to me, everything that I read and what I understood, that Tim Keller himself was involved in necessarily.
Right.
But it was clear that his campaign manager, now take a step back, and clearly the candidate needs to be responsible for whoever's on his staff. But I think that speaks to the bigger issue of who are you hiring and what are they doing? And I think as we look into the the actual governance of it, as you know, I mean, a lot of times when you work on a campaign, you end up with patronage jobs.
right.
How many of those
right.
folks are you going to move into your administration,
That's
and how
right.
closely and I are you going to keep on what they're doing?
That's
because
right.
that's what's really important.
That's
City
right.
attorney, I think right here.
We're going to split a minute here, but we're down on time, starting with HPB. What do you think about this money thing? Are we going to reapproach public finance? Does the ceiling
Right.
need to be raised to be competitive? I mean, what's the deal here?
It may well need to, if we're going to have public financing, we may not well need to raise the ceiling. The problem is not just the in-kind donations, which have been talked about before, but then also all of the other organizations that are involved. And there's a whole set of cases related to was there coordination or not.
That's right.
I, in theory, am a big fan of public financing, but I think this particular election shows that there's major, major problems in how we implement it.
That's a good point. Senator, what do you think?
I think that the thing that struck me is the fact that the campaign manager or one of the mayor's staff said, well, other people have done it.
Right.
Well, I'm going, okay, well, who was in charge of making sure that didn't happen before, and why is it acceptable? Because when public financing was discussed in the legislature, that was never the intent.
That's right.
If you're going to take public financing, that's it.
That's it. We'll have to
Yeah.
hold it there. Now, when we come back to the line, we'll look at the results of a special audit on the UNM athletic department.